Welcome to the latest episode of Branding the Experience, where we discuss ways how we can create environments where employees actually want to come to work and our customers want to keep coming back. I am your host for Branding the Experience, Ken Bator, and our subject today is brand clarity. Now, many of you know that one of my most favorite entrepreneurial pursuits in my career was my involvement with Podcast Magazine. Was one of the original category directors and was with them until possibly the end. Here is actually the inaugural issue, which I was so proud to be a part of. And this was and is possibly the last issue ever of Podcast Magazine, because the owner and founder is selling it. And if he can't get that sold, that may be the last issue, which personally pains me because I think it is a great brand and, just as important, a great publication. But as I often do in my podcasts and this show, is go back and say, well, what can we learn from different situations? Now, I remember the very, very first meet. I actually took that meeting outside of a bar and grill in Phoenix. I had a meeting in Phoenix, and they had called this meeting of folks that could be interested in being involved in this project. And I was so excited about it. I says, okay, well, I got to schedule it in for a day that's pretty busy, but I'll make it work. And I remember taking this call on my phone in my car just outside of Phoenix, and I remember the excitement. But what can we learn from this is a number of things, and it goes back to my very basic foundation of B plus C plus S, brand, culture, and strategy. And this is a great example, and I've seen this so many times, of an awesome entrepreneur having a great idea and taking it to a certain level over 2 or 3 years, and then just moving on to another project. So yeah, I think that what Steve Olsher did with it was amazing. And my hopes, my true desire is that an organization or an individual takes it, that sees the vision for Podcast Magazine, and takes it to meet and exceed its full potential. So to that point, I can certainly connect anybody interested in Podcast Magazine to the owner and founder, Steve Olsher, if you're interested in adding that to your assets. But what can we learn about brand, culture, and strategy from those first 3 years of Podcast Magazine? I think the number one is having a lot of passion and excitement is awesome at the beginning, and you obviously need that at the beginning. But in order to sustain that seed, that culture, you need to continue to feed that passion and excitement. I think that that waned a little bit. And I talked about this in another episode of Branding the Experience, is the freelance team, because there was never a group of employees. It was always this freelance team of writers and graphic designers and entrepreneurs, and it was so dynamic, even till the last day. While maybe there wasn't as much passion and excitement on that last meeting as there was in the very first, it was still there, and it was a great mix of all kinds of different folks with different talents and different ideas. And it's a shame we couldn't have kept that level through the whole 3 years. But from a culture standpoint, what we can learn is that we need to continue to keep feeding that passion and excitement, whether it is with new projects, whether it is with more involvement, or whether it is with clarity. And that will bring me back to brand in a minute. But I know that, a lot of times, and this was certainly the case an entrepreneur just goes and creates something because they can, and it's great and that's awesome. But there needs to be a lot of clarity, especially when you have so many individuals, 20 to 30, coming from different angles that are all freelancers that have their own jobs and businesses and interests, that there's clarity about roles and goals and ownership and so forth. And that didn't really happen in the 3 years, which created some turnover in what was and still was at the very end, a great team. But there was a lot of change in writers and directors over that 3 year period. And I think that came from a lack of clarity, which I think we did have in the last year, but some of that clarity came after some of that passion and excitement waned. So when it comes to the C and the B plus C plus S formula, we need to continue to feed that passion and to have that clarity. And I think what bled over into the external brand of Podcast Magazine was a lack of clarity. I spent a very, very short time working on ad sales for the magazine, and I've heard this from other folks that did that or filled that particular role for the publication over its 3 year life. And in reaching out to a number of potential advertisers and other folks involved in that particular sector, there was some brand confusion as to, well, is it for the fans? Is it for podcasters? Is it for people that sell equipment and software for podcasts? There was a lot of confusion in that. And at the end of the day, that goes back on us, me and everybody else that was part of the team, to be very clear about the brand. And from the very beginning, from that first day, we talked about Podcast Magazine specifically and first and foremost being for fans of podcasts, the listeners of podcasts. And I think that we got a little brand confusion there in the second year and possibly a little bit of the third year. I know I tried to, in the brief time that I did ad sales for Podcast Magazine, tried to be very, very specific that the Podcast Magazine brand was and still is today a lifestyle brand for people that go on their speed walks and listen to podcasts, for the folks that work out and listen to podcasts, for the folks that are vacuuming their house and washing dishes and are listening to a podcast, that it's for the listeners. Now, certainly podcasters and people that provide software and equipment certainly could take something from Podcast Magazine, but we needed to be very clear and succinct that the brand of the magazine was for the listeners of podcasts. And I think that the lack of ad support would have been alleviated if we could be a little bit more clear. So that's the brand. That's the culture, the B and the C. Strategy, what can we learn? I think that there was a clear vision in Podcast Magazine of what it could be and what it still can be. And I think that there are some very succinct tactics that go along with continuing to build that brand. So I think that there's a strategy already there. But I think that if we don't take anything else from my little ramble, my little diatribe on clarity, is being clear about the strategy. Because I think when we're clear about the strategy and communicating it, and then when we're very deliberate in terms of executing that strategy, and people could see that and be involved, that the strategy then supports the brand and the culture. And I think that that's where that passion and excitement come in. So here's my hope that Podcast Magazine will be picked up by, some awesome business person that can see, as many of us see, the potential of Podcast Magazine and the brand of Podcast Magazine. So I may or may not be involved in that. Who knows? I hope that I will be. It was certainly a passion of mine for 3 years. And I think it has a lot of life left in it. But let's not forget what we can learn from these entrepreneurial pursuits, like a podcast magazine. And even if that was the last issue, remember what we can learn from an entrepreneurial pursuit that may have not actually lived its potential, because there really isn't failure. There's just different levels of learning. So thank you for spending some time with me today. And here's hoping, as always, that you're branding the experience at a very high level for all those you serve. Do you need a speaker for your next conference? Maybe a facilitator for your next strategic planning or training session? A full program with expert panelists and interactive exercises for attendees? Or maybe you need an MC for your next event. I'm here to help and have the expertise to be a part of an amazing agenda for your audience. Learn more about Bator training and consulting at www.btcinc.net, or better yet, just contact me directly at kbator@btcinc.net, and let's talk about your next event, next training session, or next summit.